Today's daf we're going to be learning is Bava Batra daf Kuf Samachtet. Today's daf is sponsored by Diana Bloom in loving memory of her babi, Ita Rosa Sanabend, on her 30th yahrzeit. And today's daf is sponsored by Chemed Tov in honor of Tzila Goldberg's 102nd birthday. Me'av Salim. Okay, we're going to get started. 1 second. Fix something on the screen. Okay. Today's daf, I will give you a little preparation. You need to take a deep breath. There's going to be a lot of new terms. It's one of those dapim that you will understand it much better, guaranteed, the second time you go through it. You might not have a second time, which is okay. But it is, if you do walk out confused and you want to understand it better, I would just recommend listening one more time, maybe even at a faster speed, and it will definitely be more clear because we're going to introduce a whole bunch of new concepts and there's going to be a lot of different characters and we're going to try to keep it as clear as possible so that you do get it on the first time. Tanu Rabbanan, we're going to start at the very bottom. I just want to start the shiur with a kind of big looming question that you can have in your mind, especially if you get lost in the details. Think about this big question, which is, how do we have a world where there's people who forge documents, who use all sorts of methods of deceit, and that ends up messing up people who are good, honest people who now just get stuck in a bad situation. So we have a situation where somebody loses a document, which happens, right? We all lose things all the time. We can't find a document. And does that mean we have to lose out? Because in the event that someone else might lose a document and we rewrite the document, they'll do a whole deceit and collect something twice. Does that mean that me as a good, honest person is now going to have to struggle and not be able to have any sort of proof that this land is mine because I lost my document because, someone else might use some sort of form of trickery? So that's like the big looming question of today's daf. So we're going to start at the bottom again where we started yesterday, Tanu Rabbanan. Okay, we have a bright. So I come and say, listen, I lost this document. Now shtar chov is a loan, so I lent you money, and now, okay, let's now, basically the document gets lost, and I want to get a replacement document because at this point I lost the shtar chov, I can't get the money back. Even if witnesses come and said, Anu katavnu v'chatamnu v'natanu lo, like we know this is legit. Michelle's not lying. It really happened. Well, ein kotvin lo et hashtar. We don't write the shtar. To which the Braita continues and says, Bamed dvarim memurim b'shtarei halva'ah. Right? This in the halva'ah case, it's very clear what's the deceit. I could just be lying. I could have hidden the document, and then they'll write me a new one. And now I'll take out one, in a year from now, and in another year I'll take out another one, and I'll make you pay me $100 twice. Okay, that's obviously a concern. So if you're a malveh, what this means is make sure not to lose your shtar because that's really like losing your money. But shtarei mekach umenkar, but if it's an issue of a sale, kotvim chutz min achrayut shebo. So I get to get the shtar written to me. But so if I own land, there's no concern I'm going to take land twice. And we already talked about this yesterday, but we're going to develop this a lot more today. We write me a new document. So it's fair. I'm living in the land. It's my land. Everybody knows it's my land. Everybody knows I bought it. So we're going to write a document that says it's my land. But that document is going to be without achrayut. That means, okay, we're going to go now to people, not me. Okay, we're going to go to people. We're going to use names, and it's going to be very helpful for when the cases get more complicated. So David sold land to Ruth. He also happened to, in the situations we'll discuss, he sold a bunch of pieces of land, one to Ruth. We're going to deal with male, female to make it easier. David is the seller. Ruth, Naomi, and Yael are the buyers. Okay, and that's how you're going to remember in your head. Man is the seller. Then we have some female buyers, and they all bought land from the same person. Now, if Ruth loses her document that said that David sold her land. So she goes to the court, she brings witnesses. They can write her a document that says Ruth is the owner of this land and David sold it to her, but not with achrayut, okay? Because what's the concern? If she has two documents with achrayut, with a guarantee, then at one stage she could go to one of, in other words, what would happen? Let's just play out the case, and we're going to see it all played out later on, but let's just play it out already so we understand it. Comes Reuven, okay? Reuven, David took out a loan from Reuven. So Reuven comes to collect his loan. David doesn't have the money to pay back. David goes to Ruth and seizes the property. That's the way it works. We've already learned that many times. So if Ruth has two documents with achrayut, with a guarantee, she could theoretically go and say, oh, well, Reuven took the field from me, and she now goes with one of the documents that says she bought it from David. She goes to Naomi. And with another document, she goes to Yael. And she seizes their property and says, look, I had a loan out with David, and I'm seizing the property. I'm not a loan out. Sorry. I bought this land from David Bachrayut and it got seized from me. Give me the property. And then probably they rip up the star because now it's, but if she has another star, then she could do it twice. Now we're going to see it's not so simple. It's going to be hard for her to do it twice exactly in that way. We're going to have to make the case a little bit complicated, but that's the basic idea. She has two shtarot b'achrayut with a guarantee. She could theoretically go to other buyers of David. She can't go to David twice and demand the achrayut, but if she bypasses David and goes straight to demand the land from Naomi and Yael, she could theoretically demand the land from each of them based on a different document. And that's the concern. So basically what we're going to say is we can help Ruth if it's a sale. We can't help her if there's a loan. Okay? If she loaned money to David and lost her document, too bad. Because then there's really concern she'll just demand the loan twice. But because we just don't know, maybe Ruth is lying. Maybe she has the document. But if it's a sale, we'll let her have a document that says, this is yours. And we're going to see exactly later in the Gemara. Once we get past the really complicated part, we'll get to the easier stuff, which is, okay, how do we write this without achrayut? What's the text? What are you supposed to write to make it clear that this is just to prove Ruth owns the land? That's it. Not that she can go demand based on that star stuff from other people, because maybe she has two documents. But Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel disagrees and says, Omer, af shtarei mekach umemkar ein kotvim. Even that we can't write. Even what the rabbis thought you could write, no. You have a concern there. This is a little more complicated. This is also complicated, I should say. This is based on a different idea, which we're going to get to more at the end of the daf, which is otiyot niknot b'mesira or not. Okay, we've seen it before, which means literally it means can you buy words with an act of passing on? Okay, what does it really mean? Words is really just another word for a document. A document is just symbolic of something, right? The document is either symbolic of a loan, symbolic of land, of a purchase that was done. Okay, now, Ruth has a document that says that she bought land from David. What if she just gives that document, which theoretically just means the document is showing ownership over the land, even though it says in the document, David sold the land to Ruth. If Ruth passes that document on to David or passes it on to anybody, are they the owners of the land? Now, if that's the case, then there's a concern here. If we say she can pass it on to anybody, there's a concern. In other words, the chutz min achrayut prevents lekuchot, but not from the seller itself. In other words, theoretically, if, so one second, right. What are we concerned with? We can read it in the Rashbam, okay? The first Rashbam on the page, okay, which we'll see about a matana in a minute. After she got the document that said she bought the land, maybe she gave it back to David. Maybe she sold the land back to him, gave it back to him, and just instead of now, what would you normally do if you didn't think otiyot niknot b'mesira? You would have to write a new document that says Ruth sold this land to David. That's what the rabbis say. Rashbam says she could just give him back the star. Let's say he gave her money or she decided to give it to him as a gift, give it back to him. She just gives it back. That's it. Gives the star back. Now the star says David sold the land to Ruth. But the fact that she gave it to him actually means that he's now the owner. Well, now you'll understand where it gets complicated because Chazar lo mikcho, right? And then the land is his. Now, you have to understand the problem here. If she has another star that says she bought the land and she pulls that out, then what will the court think? That David's document is a forgery. Because remember our Mishnah, what did our Mishnah say? A seller can write a document because it's only bad for him, right? David can write a document even not in the presence of Ruth. And they'll say, well, if Ruth has a document that said David sold her the land, and David's trying to claim based on that he got this document from Ruth, and there's no witnesses that watched Ruth give it to him, then he'll just, he'll claim, what do you mean? I have the document, the land is mine. And she'll say, I have a document, the land is mine, and yours is a forgery. You just made that up. You wrote it, I wasn't there, and it's real, right? This is a case where it could actually be against the other side, right? And therefore against the lokach. And therefore, since she has a document to prove that she bought the land, even though this was all deceitful. It was all deceit. She actually did give David back the land, but then based on the original sale, had them draft her a new document, and she can now take the land away from David. So that's a concern, even if there's no achrayut. In other words, this isn't Naomi, Yael, other purchases of his. This is David himself. So again, I'm just going to say it simple. Since otiyot, niknot, misira, there's a chance that she gave the document back to David. Because again, why doesn't she have it? Well, if she doesn't have it, maybe he has it. Maybe she gave it back. And then she'll pull out this new document and claim that that was a forgery. And she'll be believed. And that's not true because it really is owned by David. So Rashbag says even without a achrayut, it's going to be a problem. Now we're going to put Rashbag aside. But before we do that, we're just going to say this machloket between the rabbis and Rashbag is also reflected in another machloket of theirs. And this is, by the way, the Braita did it. We're still in the Braita that we started with today. And we say the following. This is really otiyot niknot b'mesira, direct. Hanoteh matana lechavero v'yachzir lo et hashtar chazra matanato. If the case wasn't a sale, it would be the same sale or not sale. But if, let's say, David gave Ruth a gift and wrote her a document, I'm gifting you this land, and she just passes the document back to David, David becomes the owner of the land because that's otiyot niknot b'mesira. She passed it on and he owned it. Chachamim omrim matanato kayemet. The rabbis say just because she passed the document on, that was meaningless. If she wants to give him back the land, she has to write a new document. I'm giving you the land as a gift, or I'm selling you the land, or whatever it might be. But without that, she can't just give him the original shtar back because, again, the contents of the shtar don't match what happened. The contents say David sold it to Ruth. Now, even though the shtar is showing ownership of the land, whoever has it, we assume owns the land, still, the wording doesn't match, and she would have to write a new shtar. But Rashbag thinks, no, he would be the owner of the land because holding the deed is as if you own the property. Okay, we're going to leave that machloket aside right now. We're going to go into the depth of this achrayut case, and we're going to have to understand the exact details. First, we're going to suggest that it's similar to what we said before with a minor or maybe major difference. Okay, I would say minor with some minor change. Then we're going to say that that case is problematic. We're going to have to explain it a little bit differently because of a side issue. Okay, there's a reason why the deceit couldn't really happen in that way. It would have been the deceit is avoidable. Okay, and if the deceit is avoidable, then it goes back to square one. Then why do you have to say chutz min achrayut? If you want to rewrite the shtar, why can't you just write it with achrayut? And then we're going to have to say it's because we're worried about a bit of a different case. So let's hear Amar. So Amar means we're going back to a line in the Braita that we just mentioned. Chutz min achrayut shebo. So it said, you can rewrite the document. If I lose my document, I can get it rewritten, but not with achrayut. So Ruth, who lost her document that she bought land from David, remember the case. Ruth bought land from David, and some other people bought land from David after her, Naomi and Yael. So what happens here? Kotvim, so my time, what's the reason why you write chutz min achrayut? What's the deceit we're concerned for? And again, some of this will be review because we already discussed. So Rav Safra says, and we quoted this yesterday, you can't write two shtarot for one field. You just can't ever do that. We had it in yesterday's discussion also, right? Dilma azabal chov tarif le'lahai, because maybe the Baal Chov of the seller, meaning David, who sold the land to Ruth, had a loan outstanding. Reuven, he owed money to Reuven. Reuven came to collect the loan and went straight to Ruth, or maybe went to David. David didn't have the money, goes to Ruth, takes her property. Ruth now, right? So Azil Baal Chov, let's just go back. The Baal Chov is Reuven. He's the creditor. He's owed money by David. Tarif Le'lahai will seize the property from Ruth. And if Ruth has two documents, what will happen? Now we have to add a little detail that we didn't talk about before. So Azil Hai Umapik Chad. So this we already discussed. she'll take the first document and she'll go to Naomi and say, look, Reuven took my field. I'm now seizing your property because David really owes me money. It was guaranteed the land. Well, you bought land from him, so it was lien to me. So I'm going to seize your property. That's what she's going to do with the first star. Okay, that's Azilhai umapikad. Mapikad means she takes out one of the documents, vitarif lekuchot, and she'll demand it from Naomi, who's again, David sold land to three women. She'll go to the second one. Then, now, we thought that then she goes to Yael and does the same thing with the second star. But we're going to see that no. And then later the Gemara is going to say, why did you have to add this detail? Now she goes back to Reuven and says to Reuven the following thing. Shufli, give me a little time. And a little really means probably even a lot, like a few years. Before you actually kick me off this land, let me live here for another few years. De'ikumba, that I'll live here. V'hadar kartirfan. And only, okay, I see you're asking, it's not the same land. David sold three different fields to these three women. It has to be different fields, otherwise it makes no sense. Okay. I'm going to stop because I see you're asking a question. It's three different fields, okay, in order, let's assume, okay, or at least to Ruth before the others. Because then when Ruth got the land with a guarantee, it meant that any future land that David sells is lien to her for the guarantee for her purchase. Follow? So now, she says to Reuven, and you have to assume she's going to agree to share some of her proceeds from her deceit. Otherwise, why would he do this and give her a few years to live there? She says, give me a few years to live here. Then Hadakar Tirfan. Then come and go to the court and say, David owes me money. I'm seizing it from Ruth's property, and then take it from me a second time. Now, he came to her already with a document from the court, right? And tried to seize the property. She says, based on that, okay, I'm taking from Naomi. But then she says, Reuben, will you help me out here? Just let me live here for a few years. Then come back to me with a document saying, I owe you the land. Umapikachrina, I'll pull out my second star, okay, because my first star I already used on Naomi. I'll pull out my second star and I'll go to Yael, v'hadar azal tarif l'kuchal. I'll go take it from Yael the second time. So if you do that, I'll get two pieces of land and I'll share the second one with you. Probably that's what she says, because why else would he agree to give her all that time? Now, that's the case. So now we understand, okay, what we added here is it's not like she goes to Naomi and Yael one after the other. I'm going to have to ask why would we suggest that case, which is kind of what we thought yesterday. But we have to create a situation where there's a distance of a few years. So we'll leave that point aside right now. We'll come back to it soon. The Gemara asks, but wait, this case would never happen. Why not? Because of a very small, okay, in all the stages of that, okay, remember, stage one really is Reuven lends money to David. Stage two, David sells land to Ruth. Stage three, David sells land to Naomi and Yael as well, other pieces of land. Stage four, Reuven comes and sees, stage four, sorry. Ruth claims I lost my deed. Can you write me a new one? She gets a new one with achrayut. Okay. Stage five, Reuven comes and seizes Ruth's property. Stage six, Ruth goes to Yael and to Naomi and says, give me your property because he stole mine and it was guaranteed and you bought after me. Stage, I don't remember, I think we're up to seven. Sorry, I'm losing track. But stage seven, she says to Reuven, can you wait a little while before really kicking me off the land and come back in 5 years and kicking me off the land again? Okay, this is the problematic stage. That's why I wanted to go through it. He won't be able to do that. He won't be able to come back to her in 5 years and seize the property again for a very simple reason. But let me just finish the stages. Then we thought if he seizes the property again, she'll pull out star number 2 and she'll seize it from Yael. Okay, but stage 8 can never happen. Why not? Well, he won't be able to come and get a star tirfa, it's called. A star saying, I can seize the property of Ruth. Because when he goes the first time to get the star tirfa, okay, the first time he wants to seize the property, they're going to tear up the document that says David owes Reuven money. Okay. And if they tear it up in 5 years, when he goes to seize her property, he has nothing, no document in which to seize the property. That's what they're going to suggest right now. And therefore, it would never happen. Maybe you said, well, they didn't tear it. Maybe, we're worried that maybe they don't tear the IOU document. But they do, because Ha'amar Rav Nachman, Kol tirfa de lo ktiv be. If you bring a document that says, I can go seize property of David's, right, and lien property of his, because David owed me money, if you pull out a star like that that says, I can seize his property, and it doesn't say in the star the following words, basically we're going to say, it's not a valid star. You can't do anything with it. It has to say in it, Karine l'shtara de milve. It has to say, and we tore up the IOU so that things like this don't happen. It's lav tirfi. If it doesn't say those words, there's nothing he could do with that. And furthermore, kol adrachta delokti bekarin and latirfa lav adrachtu. We're now going to see these are stages. If you want, you can read it in the Rashbam, but I'm going to explain to you outside what the Rashbam explains. That there were stages when Reuven's a Baal Chov. The stages work like this. First, Reuven pulls out the loan document, says David owes me money. The court rules, yes, you're right. You can now go seize property of David's. That's the shtar tirfa. And when they do that, they must rip up the document and write in the shtar tirfa, we ripped up the document. If they don't do that, it's all invalid. That stage basically allows Reuven to go look for a field of David's that he can seize. Once he finds a field, and he has to kind of say, this was a field that David sold, right? He finds, let's say in our case, Ruth's field. He goes back to the court, and the court writes an adrachta. That says, you can collect this specific field. Now, when they write the adrachta, and that's what we just read, if you have an adrachta and it doesn't say you ripped up the tirfa, it's not an adrachta. This, by the way, is already irrelevant to our case, but it's just going through the stages. And then you get to the shuma, okay? Called shuma deloktibe karina la adrachta lav shumi. Every time you get a new one, you rip up the old one so that nobody uses these documents twice. What's the shuma? The shuma is, well, we found this land that Ruth bought from David. The problem, and it's lien to Reuven's loan. The problem is we don't know how much it's worth and how much the loan is, right? The loan is $100. We have to find $100 worth of the land. So we have to assess the land and then come up with a percentage that matches. That's the shuma. So once you get the shuma, you can take 33% of Ruth's land. Then you rip up the adrachta, and you have to rip up the adrachta to do that. Okay, fine. The main point being stage 8 can never happen because stage 8 assumes that Reuven can come 5 years later and seize the property again with a new shtar tirfa. He won't be able to make a new shtar tirfa because he doesn't any longer have the document that says the IOU because it was ripped up. So this would never happen. So the Gemara modifies one point in this whole thing, which is the starting point. The starting point was that Reuven lent money to David. That was stage 1. Well, now we're going to change stage 1, and we're going to say, Lo tzricha deka'ate mikoach av hateh. And the Gemara suffices with this. They don't even explain to you the whole case, but I'll explain to you the whole case again from the start. It'll also help with reviewing this over and over. Instead of Reuven being a Baal Chov and loaning money to David, Reuven is the real owner of the land, and David stole the land from him, and after he stole the land, he sold it to Ruth. So Reuven comes back, that's what the Gemara says, Mikoch Avate, says, I can prove that I'm the owner of this land. My father bought this land, or whatever it might be. I bought this land, and it's not yours. You stole it. Now, once you talk about stealing, there's no tearing up of documents, right? They don't tear a document at any point because in the end, what document will they tear? That Reuven's the owner of the land? Of course, we're never going to tear that document. Reuven is the owner of the land. So Reuven seizes the property from Ruth. Then what happens? Ruth says, right? She goes to Yomi and says, oh, Reuven seized the property because it was stolen land. I'm seizing yours. That she uses her first star for. Then she says to Reuven, I know this land was stolen from you. Can you give me a few years? And, probably promises something, right? Maybe part of the land she's going to steal from Yael later. Can you give me some time? Reuven says, no problem. He comes back 5 years later. Now we have no problem. He comes back 5 years later. He claims, this is my land. I have a document that says this is my land. We don't rip that up. And when he comes back 5 years later, she then goes to Yael. Okay? Now we're going to get to the fact of why did she wait the 5 years. Okay, why is that important? So why couldn't, right? Why did she have to say, give me 5 years? Again, I'm just adding 5. It could be 3, it could be, but a significant number of years. Why don't you just say, like we said yesterday, since she has 2 documents, tarif hadra tarif, she can go at that same moment, first to Naomi with one, then to Yael with another. Well, no, that won't happen because people will get onto her right away. Because if you do it at the same time, she's going to have a lot of people going against her. In other words, Yael and Naomi are going to meet in the marketplace and say, "Oh, could you believe what happened to me?" And the other ones will say, "Could you believe what happened to me?" And then they're going to realize she just took from you and she just took from me based on the exact same loan. And they're going to be onto her. And then they're going to both go up against her and prove that she was deceitful. But if it happens 5 years later, no one's going to realize it was connected to the same incident. And basically, they won't realize. It's just because, again, Ruth is not going to actually, right? It's about the same piece of land, but nobody really knows that. It's not clear when she goes to Yael and says, "Listen, someone seized a property from me." She's not going to know it's the same property she claims someone seized from her 5 years ago. No one's going to even suspect that. So that's why we had to create the situation where there was a big gap of time, and then no one's going to pay attention. Okay, right? The chances of them talking about in the shuk and saying the same thing happened to me, right? What are the chances? It's possible, but unlikely. So that was all to explain, just to remind you why when somebody comes to court and says, "I lost a document," has proof that she definitely bought the land, why can we only write her a document without achrayut? Because if she had the achrayut, in the second document, she could theoretically collect it from other people twice, okay? From the lekuchot, from again, someone who bought land from the same person as she did, right? But after her, that would be lien to her, she could theoretically collect twice. And we created this complicated scenario of how that could happen. Now the Gemara says, wait, but there's a much simpler possibility to prevent this from happening. And why don't they suggest this? Why don't we write the person who lost their document a good star? Again, we're concerned for nice, good, honest people who lose their stuff. Like, why don't we just write a fair and square document and come up with a better solution for how to avoid deceit? Like, lichtov tavra lemocher. We'll write a shovar which is like a receipt to the seller that says, now a receipt usually means, let's just go to receipts now. This is a good way of understanding why a shovar is called a shovar. A shovar is from the language of to break. What does the shovar do? It breaks the star. It breaks the strength of a document. So in a regular case, you usually use it that, let's say Ruth lends money to David. David says, "Okay, I'll pay back the money, but we're going to rip up the IOU because I don't want you to collect it on me twice." And Ruth says, "I lost it. I don't have it." Now, we don't know if Ruth really lost it or not. We're worried she's going to collect twice. So what do? We say, okay, we'll write a shovar. We learned this in the Mishnah, that David paid the money back and David will hold on to that. So if Ruth comes a second time, he'll pull out the shovar. And what does that do? It weakens the power of the star that Ruth is bringing. In our case, it's totally different shovar. It's not a receipt that anyone got money. It's a receipt, right? We call a receipt like, okay, I got money or I paid money or something like that. But here, the shovar, it's just another thing that breaks the power of a star. What does that mean? Well, if Ruth pulls out that second star, David will pull out a shovar that says the following, and it will weaken that second star that Ruth were worried, or the first star. Let's say Ruth pulls out the one that got lost, right? Let's say she pulls out the one that got lost. In other words, right now she's operating on the new one. She claims it was lost. She's using the new one. What if she pulls out the old one? So we're going to write David the following thing, and he's going to keep it in his safe at home. That pull out when needed. Kol shtari diyapkun al arada psulin. Any star that Ruth pulls out on this land is going to be disqualified. Livar min diyapik bismanada, unless it's with today's date or later, or today's date, right? What he's basically saying is the only document that's valid that Ruth can use about this land is the one written today, which is when they rewrite the star. Okay? And then if Ruth tries to pull out an old document, he'll pull out the shovar and say, "What are you doing?" So, therefore, since they don't make this suggestion, comes the Gemara to say, Amrua Rabbanan kamei Rav Papa, the rabbis came before Rav Papa, V'amrela kamei Rav Ashi, some people say before Rav Ashi. Zot omeret, from the fact that we don't suggest this possibility, it must be that we hold ein kotvim shoval. We don't write shovarim. Now, there's a big machloket about this. Today we're going to learn about a whole bunch of different big machlokot. One is, are we allowed to write shovarim, like in a loan case? Now, in a loan case, what's the problem with writing a shovar? Until the shovar is written, it's the responsibility of Ruth, who lent the money, to keep the document, the IOU. It's all on her. And if she can't pull out the document, she can't get her money. So the idea of writing a shovar switches the responsibility to the borrower and says, if you lose your receipt, right? It's like when you get a credit in a store and you lose it, right? How many times do we lose credits and then we lost all that money? But it's your responsibility, right? But why move since the responsibility is all on the on the lender, the creditor, to keep that star if they want to collect it? It's unfair to shift the responsibility onto the borrower, right? Remember, we talked the whole beginning of the Masechet about chazaka and how people aren't expected to keep shtarot and the mice eat them and all sorts of things. Why are we shifting the responsibility to the other side? So therefore, there's a whole school of thought that says we don't write shovarim. Come the rabbis and they say to Rav Papa or Rav Ashi, here's the proof in the pudding. The reason there's no shovar here is because they don't think that you can write shovarim. Okay? But Rav Papa or Rav Ashi, whoever it was, turning out to Amabet, says to them, no, 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 you're wrong. This is a unique case, and we're going to have two possible explanations why this is unique and why a shovar could work in a regular case, but wouldn't work here. Amar lehu, ba'ama kotvim shovar. You really can write shovarim in general. But like so, if a creditor loses their star, yes, they could get paid back their loan, and the borrower gets the receipt that says they paid. And if they try to get double collection, yeah, the borrower can pull out the shovar, and yes, it's the borrower's responsibility. But tama here it's different because think about our case. Where is Ruth going to go when she wants to get the land and she's going to do some deceit here? First, she goes to Naomi, then she goes to Yael. Notice who she doesn't go to. She doesn't go to David at all. She just goes straight to the people who own his land that, right, bought land from him, the lien property. So, what's it going to help that David has a star in hand, the shovar in hand? It's not going to help because she bypasses him entirely. So that's what we're going to read inside. Did Dilma Azobal, right? Hachanutama, what's the reason here? Dilma Azobal Chov, what are we worried about? Again, we'll get a bit of a review. We're worried the Baal Chov will come, Reuben will come and seize the property, Tarif Minei Delokach, take it from Ruth. Va'azal Iu v'tarif lekucha, Ruth will go and take from other purchasers, from David. V'shovar gabe lekucha leka, and the shovar is not in the hands of Naomi and Yael. We don't make sure that each one has a shovar that says, don't take, right? I mean, theoretically, you could say every time David sells land, write a new document, but they didn't do that kind of thing. And they're not going to have the shovar in hand. So now they say, wait, that's not really true. Because why? Well, what happens if you were Naomi and Ruth seizes your property? What are you going to do? Well, your land was, you bought it probably with achrayut, which means you're going to go back to David and say, hey, Ruth took my property. And then David's going to say, but she can't because, right, what star did she use? And in the end, they're going to get to Ruth, right? They're going to realize. So, lekucha lav amari da'ara hadre. But in the end, right, eventually, the lekuach, the one who bought the land, like Naomi or Yael, will go amare da'ara. She will go to the owner. Mare is the owner, to the owner of the land, and then the shovar is in the hands of the owner. So that's not true what you just said, that this is unique because David's holding the shovar and we're not going to David. We will go to David eventually. They say no, eventually. But in the meanwhile, that's what's going to happen. Ruth is going to seize Naomi's property. Naomi's going to then, after that, go back to David. David's going to say, oh, this was a deceit. Or I guess when, it depends which star she pulled out, but let's say she pulled out the first star with Naomi, or at least with Yael. Adahachi, right? Or the second time she goes to do it, it'll be obvious. Adahachi vahachi shamat va'achal peri. But in the meanwhile, the problem is, first, Ruth is going to seize the property and they'll give it up. They'll relinquish the property. Only after they'll go to get their money back. When they go to get their money back, they'll figure it out. But at that point, first of all, Ruth is smart. She knows they're going to be onto her because she knows she signed that shovar, right? So she's going to quickly eat as much produce as she can, and there'll be no way to assess exactly how much was taken. And Ruth will have ended up gaining. Okay, we don't know how much, but she'll definitely have stolen things from them, and that's the concern. Or alternatively, and that's why we can't write a shovar here, because it won't fully help. It'll help ultimately, but not from the beginning. Inami, alternatively, you could say, Lilokach shelo b'achrayut. There's a concern that Ruth could seize property from Naomi and Yael in a case where Naomi and Yael bought the land from David without any guarantee. And that would mean they'll never go back to David. If you buy land without a guarantee, usually you get a cheaper price for it, but you know that you're taking a risk. And if someone seizes it from you, you have nothing to, you can't go back to David and claim any money. So they'll never go back to David in that case. And Ruth will end up seizing their property unfairly because she had two documents. So that's why a shovar won't help. One of those two reasons. To which the Gemara asks one more complicated question. Then we're done with the really complicated part of today. Wait a minute. We just said we're just not worried in this case of writing a shovar, but in a loan, you could write a shovar. But why? In a loan, shouldn't you be worried about the same thing? Let's go back to a case of a loan. Ruth lends money to David, and David pays the money back, gets a shovar. Here, there's no lekuchot or land or anything, so that's why I'm switching, because I want to have David, the one holding the shovar, is the same person as holding the shovar here. So Ruth loans money to David. Ruth says, I don't have rights. It's the same. Ruth is the one who loses her document, wants to get another loan document written up. She writes a shovar to David. And now what happens? Ruth pulls out a document that says, right, David owes her money and goes straight to Naomi. And then she pulls out another document and goes straight to Yael. Until they get to David, right, and say, okay, David, pass back the money, time will have elapsed and Ruth will have benefited. Or maybe they bought it from David without a chayil and they'll never get back to David. So what does it help that David has a shovar in that loan case that says he paid the money back? She could just bypass him and go demand it from lien property. So why are we not worried about that? And the reason is, hatam dezuze masik, when it's money, in other words, a loan is cash. Amre faise bal chov bezuze. When Ruth goes to Naomi and says, give me your land, Naomi's going to say, let me check first with David. I think it's possible David gave you the money back because it's money. Like if David doesn't have land, so Ruth and Naomi both know that David doesn't have land and they'll give the land back. Okay, let's just read one more minute. Hachada aramasik, if it's land, that in our case, Ruth bought land and wants to get land back. Now, if she loses her land, Ruth is not going to be satisfied with getting money back. And therefore, if she goes straight to Naomi and Yael, because David doesn't have land, they're going to basically give up their land first. They're not going to check with David, did you give back land? Because they know David doesn't have land in his name right now. So they'll first give up their land, and then they'll go to David, and that's the whole problem. In a loan case, they're not going to give up their land so easily till they make sure that David really didn't give back the loan, because it's more likely that he gave back money. And then, there's just no way to see that visibly, so they'll check with him first. They check with him first, he'll pull out his shovar. In our case, they'll only go to him later, and therefore, there's no concern with a loan case of this kind of deceit, but there is concern in a sale case. Okay, that's the complicated part of our daf, which is really all to explain the words chutz min achrayut shebo. What is the deceit that we're concerned for? And we had one explanation. We had to modify it a little and say, wait, it wasn't a Baal Chov, because that star would have been ripped up. There's no chance they would come 5 years later. We wouldn't be able to seize the property 5 years later. So it must be a case where they come saying, I'm the real owner and David stole the land from me. Then nothing would have been ripped up, and there is a possibility they could have come twice. And then that would lead to this whole deceit. And then we just had some side questions, which was first, right, sorry, let me just remember which the first question was. Right, why we have to have this time elapse, why they had to complicate the case so much and say, she would have to convince him, give me a few more years, right? And that's what we said, because if it happened all at the same time, they'd be onto her. And then why not write a shovar? And the rabbis thought that meant maybe there is no shovar. And then they realized in this case, a shovar would be irrelevant because it's sitting with the wrong person. Right? There's no way to get the shovar out to the right people who would need to be sitting with. And it wouldn't be relevant also to give it to buyers. You would want to give it to the seller, and it just wouldn't help. Okay, then we're going to get to what I promised we get back to. This is the very easy part of our daf, at least this part. Amar chutz min achrayut shebo. So hechi kadvinan. How do we write a document that says there's no guarantee here? So what's it supposed to look like? Amar Rav Nachman de katve hachi. Rav Nachman says we write the following. Shtar dinan, this shtar. So if Ruth comes to the court and says, I lost my document that I bought this land, we write her the following document. This shtar dinan, that means this shtar, dilola migbebe, is not for collection. Okay, we're very explicitly clear here. Lomi mishabde, not from lien property of David's, and lomi b'nei chare, and not from free property. In other words, Even not, it's not even that, you can't collect it. You can't collect it not from lien property. You can't collect it from not lien property. You can't collect it at all. Okay? Ela ki hechi de tekum ara biyade de lokach. It's just to say that this land belongs to Ruth. That's it. And again, if you remember, Rashbag doesn't allow for this because otiyot niknot b'mesira, but the rabbis think this is okay. As long as you write it without achrayut, it's sufficient. Amar Rafram zot omeret. So another zot omeret. From here we can infer what? Achrayut ta'ut soferhu. Famous machloket. We've talked about this before. If you don't write a guarantee in a document, it's assumed that the sofer made a mistake and just didn't include it. This is kind of like ketubah. If you get married and the husband didn't give the wife a ketubah, it doesn't matter. He has to give it to her anyway. There's just this assumption that every marriage comes with a ketubah. There's an assumption that every land that was sold is sold with achrayut. This is a subject of debate. But they want to say here the fact that, now how do we get this? Because because you have to write all these things. This is not for collection, right? This is not ba'achrayut. Halo katav hachi gabe. It sounds like if you hadn't written that, Ruth would be able to collect on that loan. That means achrayut is ta'ut safer, and it should have been in there. Rav Ashi amar achrayut lav ta'ut saferhu. Rav Ashi thinks differently. So then, how does he explain my chutz me'achrayut shabo? So how does he explain? Just it has to be a document without a guarantee. Very simply, to lokti be'achrayut. It just says David sold this land to Ruth. Period. Doesn't say achrayut. We don't assume there was a guarantee. Simple as that. Okay, so that's a very basic machloket. We actually hold that achrayut ta'ut safer. And if you don't write achrayut, there is achrayut anyway. Well, apropos that topic, we have a case. There was a woman. She gave money to a particular man to be her shaliach, her messenger, to go buy her land. But she didn't specify, was it supposed to be with achrayut or not? Was he supposed to buy it with a guarantee or not with a guarantee? He goes and buys her land without a guarantee. And perhaps the property was seized, or perhaps she was just worried it would be seized. She goes before Rav Nachman and she said, I can't believe he bought me this land without achrayut. I wanted it with. Amar le, he says to the man, the shaliach, litikune shadartich v'lo la'avute. The woman can claim, I sent you to help me, not to mess me up. Right? Buying land without achrayut really messes you up, because if you buy the land and it gets seized from you, you have nothing. So therefore, this is what he recommends him to do. And I don't have time to get into this today, but the commentaries say, why couldn't we just say mekach ta'ut if the whole thing goes back? So they try to come up with the answers, but it's a good question. I'll just leave the question aside. But he says, this is what I'm going to make you do. Zil zavne mine shelo b'achrayut. You go purchase a lamb for yourself from the seller. That same lamb that she wanted, that you bought for her, purchase it yourself without achrayut. The original deal, just instead of for her, purchase it for yourself. And then you sell it to her with a guarantee. And you have to now guarantee the property for her because you messed up. You have to wonder, like, it's a big responsibility for this person to now get into. But he does get the money for the land from her. Anyway, it's a bit of a weird, the commentaries have some questions, but we're going to move on. Rashbag Omer. Now we're back to finishing up this machloket. We're going back to this machloket Rashbag and the rabbis about otiyot niknot b'mesira. So first we're actually going to think it's something else, and then we're going to say, no, it really is based on otiyot niknot b'mesira as we started. So Rashbag Omer notem matana lechavero v'yachzir lo et hashtar chazra matanato. David gives a gift of Ruth, gives the land as a gift to Ruth as a gift, gives her the land, writes a document that says David gave this land as a gift to Ruth. And Ruth gives back the document to David. The land is his. Even though it says in the document, David gave the land to Ruth, David now has the document with that. The document, it's kind of like money, right? Is a coin, but it's reflective of something. A document is just a piece of paper, but it's reflective of what's in it. Whoever has the document has the land. The land is reflective, the document is reflective of the land. If she passes it back to him, does an act of acquiring, Masira, he acquires the document, and with that, he acquires the land. So, remember, you can purchase a land with a shtar. So, that's the first understanding. V'chachamim omrim matanato kayemet. No, the gift is still a gift. Just because she gave him the document doesn't mean that he acquired the land. My time of the Rashbag. So, like I said, first we're going to think it's something else. Amar of Asi, naaseh ke'omer lo. It's as if David said to Ruth, Sadeh zo netuna lecha, kozman shashtar biyadcha. It would have to be biadech in our case, but it's like David said, here's a document, and the field will be yours as long as you have this shtar in your hand. If you don't, like if you give it to me, it won't be yours anymore. To which Matkefla Rabba says, that's ridiculous. What? It's all depending on whether Ruth holds the shtar. What if the shtar gets lost? What if the shtar is stolen? What, that means Ruth's not the owner? Of course she's still the owner. Ela Amar Rabba, and then comes Rabba with what we started with. Otiyot niknot b'misirat kamiflage. I'll remind you, the Gemara never said this until this point, right? Just, we read the Rashbam who explained that it was based on this conclusion of Rabba. The machloket is otiyot niknot b'misirat. Rashbag savar otiyot niknot b'misirat. Rabbanan savre ein otiyot niknot b'misirat. And as we said, right, can you acquire the words, meaning the document, what it says, what the content of the words are, the object itself? Can that be acquired by passing over the document or not? Rashbag says yes. Rabbis say no. We're going to stop here. We'll pick up with this debate between Rebbe and Rashbag, and then in the already in the next class, which reflects also this machloket, although we're going to have some issues. Okay, so the first part of the daf I already reviewed, so we're just going to review from the Amar Mar part. How do we write no achrayut? And there was a debate because is achrayut to utzofer or not? That's a very big machloket. We had the case of the shaliach who bought without achrayut and then basically was forced to do it with achrayut. That, by the way, goes hand in hand with achrayut to utzofer. We just assumed that she wanted it with achrayut. That's the base assumption. And then we get to this last machloket about otiyot niknot b'misira or not, and that's the braita that we started with today. And then we just finished with it and gave the explanation for it, which we knew already because the Rashbam had read the Gemara further on and it told us, but only now does the Gemara get to that's the basis of the machloket. First, Ravasi suggested something else, and Rabba came and said, no, the machloket is otiyot niknot b'misira or not. With that, we finished for today. Wishing everyone a good day. Like I said in the beginning, if it's a little confusing, I hope I repeated it enough that it's clear. If not, recommended to, even at double speed or something, but listen again and that'll help you, or just realize that sometimes you have to move on even if you didn't get everything, which is okay too.